Hello and welcome fellow motorsports fans, this time with a bit of a different episode because while we had a great F1 weekend with some of our favorite rookie drivers putting in some really sweet drives, and it is definitely something worth talking about. As I said last time, I was at the DTM final at Hockenheim, so I thought this deserves a standalone episode to talk about all things, well, DTM plus support categories. You know me, I am obsessed. I've been watching them all year long and there is so much to talk about. But in case you're just here for feeder series stuff, don't switch off the video, skip to the end because we will still cover our driver news segment with the traditional feeder series things. Anyway, let's get going. Before we begin talking about any of the actual racing, I just wanted to say a few words about the fantastic live experience in case you've never been to any of these races or have only been to F1 like I have before this. I've only ever been to two live races, one of them being the Karting World Championship and the other one being F1 at the Red Bull Ring. So obviously I've read into it that Sportscars is a very different experience and a lot more open, but honestly I did not expect it to be like quite this open, especially for all the support categories. Walking around the paddocks, getting really up close and personal to all the cars. If you're not as socially awkward as me, you could chat at the mechanics or whatever. So it is a really cool, open and just relaxed atmosphere. Like just the fact that they don't feel the need to do any more like precautionary actions means there's never been any incidents. So yeah, you know, that just says a lot about the crowd of people going to sports car racing, I think. Anyway, we begin with the big show, the DTM itself, and we've had a fantastic setup for a great title showdown with Mirko Bortolotti and Kelvin van der Linde going into the last weekend as the favourites, but also with Maro Engel still mathematically well in contention even all the way until the last race. Kelvin van der Linde set himself up perfectly with a win in the first race, resulting in the two, so Bortolotti and Kelvin, basically even on points going into the last race of the season. So it could have been a proper epic like on-track battle and basically whoever finishes ahead wins the season. Unfortunately, it couldn't quite turn into this epic on-track battle because Bortolotti put it on pole with Nicky Team, his teammate, as a rear gunner right next to him as well. And on the other side of that coin, we had Kelvin van der Linde starting like P5, P6-ish, I don't even remember. And he completely bottled it on the first lap, went backwards and never really recovered. And truth be told, he even went further backwards over the course of the race. At least it felt like from the grandstands. So not really the epic final showdown in terms of proper door-banging racing on track, but still a very cool story. I personally am super happy. First of all, for Mirko Bortolotti, his first title win since 2017. And of course, he is like the Lamborghini ace driver in my mind. When I think Lamborghini drivers, he is a name that pops up first. And I guess nowadays Matteo Caroli, but still, he really is a driver definitely worthy of any championship title, really. And I do have to point this out. Well, I respect Kelvin van der Linde and I think he's a pretty funny character by all accounts, and he's no discussion to be had about his driver quality, right? But I think he did sort of karma fuck himself out of a DTM title by taking out Lawson in 2021. So I am really glad he can have any title out there, but I would like it if he doesn't get one of those DTM titles on his resume. I think that would just be fair. But either way, he would have also been a worthy champion, of course, in terms of the actual driving displayed. Now, if you've been watching this channel a few times or just been paying attention to the background, you may be able to tell I am a bit of a Grello fan, or well, guess pay attention to my cap as well. And unfortunately, it has not been a good year for the Grello or returning champion Thomas Preining. Only P5 overall, which honestly, given what they've been showing as like peak performance over the year, this actually almost feels like an overperformance in the overall standings. Sure, it is like a BOP series, so we'll never get to the bottom. Did Mentai maybe drop the ball a little? Presumably it was mostly down to BOP, that's just being realistic. Either way, Preining's consistency has been absolutely remarkable, finishing every single race in the points, so he did about what he could. I do still want to point out that unlike how I felt about Dennis Olsen, his teammate last year, I do have to say that Jansen Guven has also put in a pretty good fight throughout the year, and he is one of those cases where I do feel like if you just look at the final standings at the end of the year, it doesn't do justice to how well Guven has been running. He also got incredibly unlucky multiple times over the course of the year. For example, him not having this flawless track record is very much, I don't think, just down to himself. So either way, an interesting dynamic there. Preining, sure, the better of the two, but the gap isn't anywhere near as big. And I do think we had a similar story playing out over in the Abt Audis with Van der Linde and Ricardo Feller, because once again, yes, maybe Ricardo Feller lacked that last little bit around the pit cycle to actually get any of the really big results, like winning races, but he was also very often a front-running force and basically just took turns with Kelvin really to fight at the sharp end. Just Kelvin was the one that then actually managed to convert it into the really good results. At least that's how I felt about it. Then, spotlight on one of the younger drivers, and here I do need to highlight Luca Engstler, the winner of the last round of the year. Yes, aided by the fact that Bortolotti did not feel the need of taking any risks. I don't even know how Engstler got up into the lead in the first place. These are the kinds of things you do miss if you're just sitting on a grandstand and don't have the stream and the live timing open at all times. Either way, he is obviously a very famous family name, and you know, definitely felt like a pay driver. I don't really like the term, but you know what I mean. More budget and clout than maybe ability. And his performances last year certainly did seem to back up this opinion. But he has found something different this year, not just in DTM, just throughout his campaigns, also in the GT World Challenge Europe and everything. And here in particular, he has actually found himself winning 2 of these DTM races. Now, this is no bad feat by any means. You don't just luck your way into winning these races. I don't remember quite how he won the first one, but this one now, obviously very recent in memory, so I can tell you, no luck involved here. Really, the only luck is that the guy he was fighting for the win was someone who couldn't really afford to take risks, or rather didn't need to take any risks. Still, he is very hit or miss as a driver, don't get me wrong. It's not like he's just been consistently great throughout the year, but he has now at least shown these really high ups. So if we can maybe work on reducing the lows a little bit, I reckon he could be a really competent driver going forward. And then, last but not least for the DTM, a little cool side story. One of my personal favorite just GT drivers or sports car drivers or whatever, Jules Gounod taking P6 on his DTM debut. Of course, no surprise there. He is incredibly familiar with these AMG GT3s, so it's not like he is a rookie just because it's his debut. Nonetheless, an excellent drive, and he's been talking about, you know, maybe looking for a full season DTM right next season, and I would be all for it. I think he has been like so missing in the British GT this year, usually one of the super fun characters to watch charge his way through the field and everything. Like, he's also just got a, you know, pretty flashy driving racing style, I suppose. So I would very much love to see Gounod over in the DTM full season. Then we had the second tier of this particular, let's call it the national German ladder, I suppose, with the ADAC GT Masters, aka the series where the ADAC Formula boys go after failing miserably in the French F4 ever since they've, you know, structured this program that way of just sending juniors over to France instead of actually having a German F4 series. And while, yes, as I said, most of them have failed more or less miserably in the French F4, it is such a pleasure watching Max Reis and in particular Finn Wiebelhaus and now new champion Tom Kalender. He is paired with another Formula dropout in Elias Sappinen. You should be familiar with him as well. And it's just so cool watching these like 16-year-olds throw around these mega quick, hugely expensive GT3 race cars as just teenagers. And I'm sure all of them have bright futures in sports cars if they, you know, want to / can afford to, but at least it looks like they can. In particular, as I just said, Kalender and Wiebelhaus have hit the ground running from round 1 onwards, and this field, it's not great, don't get me wrong, it isn't like a fully professional GT3 field by any stretch of the imagination, but it is not a bad field. I would say at worst you can probably compare it to something like the GT Open level, you know, maybe lacking the really, really good pros at the sharp end, but equally no like full amateur entries or anything either. So if you've never watched this series, definitely go check it out. The racing is usually pretty good. My favourite car on the grid wasn't any of the Mercedes driven by the young German guys though, it was instead the FK Performance BMW number 56 with last year's GT4 Germany champ Maxim Osten and Porsche Cup graduate Leon Köhler sharing the car. Osten in particular is one of the rapidly rising stars in the GT3 world. If you've somehow missed him this year, he had his debut at the end of last year in the Asian Le Mans series, and already there I said he'll be one to watch, and it turns out I was incredibly right there for once. It doesn't happen too often. He already had his first chance at a factory gig even in the 3 Hours of Monza just a couple weeks ago. Unfortunately, that one he ruined entirely by wrecking the car in quali to the extent that they could not actually start the race. I really hope this doesn't do any harm to his career long term, because obviously a huge mistake, but I guess one you can forgive a young guy in his first year, probably super nervous, racing with the big boys for the first time. So, you know, I kind of get it. Either way, he is one to watch. Yes, they couldn't secure the title. He couldn't quite do the triple after winning the M2 Cup 2 years ago. We'll get to the M2 Cup in just a little bit. So definitely Maxim Osten, remember the way if you do like BMW GT3 racing. Leon Köhler isn't particularly exciting in comparison, but certainly not a slow driver either. Just, I don't know, I can't get quite as hyped about him. Talking about Köhler being a Porsche Cup graduate though, we also had the Porsche Cup Germany. As if you know the Porsche Cup landscape, it is probably the most competitive national Porsche Cup series. I'd say it's even pretty close to rivaling the Super Cup, at least in terms of depth, even if, yeah, sure, a handful of really strong names are missing from this entry list. Most of them really are present. And here we had a truly beautiful storyline playing out with Larry Tenforde, the guy I dubbed Mr. Porsche Cup earlier in the year. He ends his Porsche Cup career in style by taking his 8th overall title, his 4th title in Germany. Truly epic stuff. This guy is an absolute machine in Porsche Cups. If you don't know him, you've just never watched a Porsche Cup race, so that's alright. Go back in time, go watch Larry Tenforde race. I assure you, it is worth it. He is really quick. He has said he recently has been enjoying more watching his younger drivers that he is managing. He's got some sort of like management thing going on, and he enjoys coaching them, watching them grow. But I do still hope this isn't the end of his driver career. He hasn't said anything officially, but I suspect we could finally find him in something like a GT3 next season, because he's had a couple cameos again and he's done really well in them again. So I really don't see why he shouldn't be in any quicker cars. I do also want to give a huge shout out to young Theo Overhaus for securing P3 overall in only his 2nd year in the series as a 19-year-old, and he is one of Germany's rising sports car stars, no doubt about it. I was really happy to see him in the Super Cup this year as well, even though that campaign hasn't quite gone just as well as this. But either way, he is one to watch in the next couple of years in these Porsche Cup series, I would assume. Aside of the everlasting Larry Tenforde versus Harry King battle, we also had a pretty good storyline in the Young Rookie Cup fight with the Dutch Heavy Series, at least in the rookie bracket for some reason. And here my favorites are both Formula rejects as well. One you should absolutely know, Cars Hovercourt. If you don't, then you've not really been watching Formula racing the last couple of years. That's all right. He's one of those that he should be in Formula 3. Arguably, he should have been in F3 last year already. And now he has had to, call it a day in the Formula stuff just because of budgetary issues. And he's gone to the Porsche Cup Series, hit the ground running, both here and in the Super Cup, and is, positioning himself, I guess, hoping to become Porsche Junior going forward, maybe next season. So, yeah, I would say he's got a good shot at it. Unfortunately, he couldn't secure the rookie title with a DNF in the last race. A little bit unfortunate on his end. Then we also had Robert De Haan, who in my opinion was the most exciting rookie going into this race. Again, it is his 2nd year in the car after only doing a single year of Spanish F4 with very little success, admittedly. And he is so excellent in these cars. Won the Porsche Cup Benelux last year and put himself into title contention. Not quite in the Germany, but at least, well, remotely in the Super Cup, as much as you could contend with Tenforde this year. So either way, I thought he had about the season I expected. Maybe I expected a teeny tiny bit more, but once again, one of those people where he will certainly be hoping to be that Porsche Junior going forward. Let's see if he can. It's so tough to be in this like Porsche Cup ecosystem with so many young and like excellent looking drivers fighting for one seat down the line. So yeah, it is really, really interesting, and certainly a series you should keep an eye on if you aren't already, especially if you like to see where some of our Formula dropouts or rejects end up, because Porsche Cup tends to be a pretty common destination. And then, last but not least, the lowest tier of our little national ladder, the GT4 Germany series. And as I said, reigning champ Maxim Osten doing really well. Typically, the reigning champs of this series do quite well, but unfortunately here, we had a heartbreaking end to the season for pretty overwhelming championship favorites, Michael Schrey and Gabriele Piana. Both are GT4 veterans. Piana is quite comfortably, for my money, the best driver on the grid, at least if we combine if we just talk about overall driving, like raw skill plus experience and like just how well he executes these races. Yeah, he tends to just drive flawless weekends consistently. It's just what he does. Unfortunately, the BOP for BMWs was quite atrocious this weekend, so they were on the back foot anyway, but they had such a points lead, it wouldn't even have mattered too much, I don't think. But unfortunately, they also got one mechanical DNF, which subsequently cost them the title, despite, as I said, dominating all year long. Instead, they handed the title over to young Finn Zulauf and Joseph Knopp. We might be familiar with at least Joseph Knopp. I don't think Zulauf has a history in Formula racing. He is the driver of the two who I tend to rate higher. He certainly has had an excellent season here and in the GT4 Europe, so he's definitely quick. But this title, yeah, I mean, I reckon if you ask them, do we really deserve the title? There's a decent chance they're going to say no, it was, Schrey and Piana's on paper. Either way, a pretty good season from both teams. I want to highlight once again the BMW M2 Cup winners though, because it turns out that Leighton Fourie was actually the last ever M2 Cup winner, because the series got cancelled again after only a handful of seasons. That's super depressing because, as I said, past champions like Maxim Osten are doing really well for themselves. And now Fourie is also doing quite well for himself. Yes, combined with teammate Max Rosam, he couldn't quite fight for the overall GT4 championship. They had to settle for very good still, don't get me wrong, P4 in the title battle. And I have to say, Fourie in particular was still very good and looked more or less like a repetition of what Osten did last year. He hit the ground running. I think that's like the key bit here. There's no adjusting time needed. So this M2 Cup really prepared you well to run these GT4 machines. And yeah, he was very good battling wheel to wheel. Yeah, a couple mistakes here and there in the tight battling, but usually moving forward, not just stagnating or going backwards. So overall, a very good driver, and I still hope we find him either in a repeat of GT4 Germany next year or moving up to GT Masters, for example, because it certainly can never hurt to have a couple more South Americans around. Now, please drop me all of your favorite storylines from the DTM down in the comments, and just because I'm really curious, let me know how many of these support series do you watch, like in sports cars in general? Do you just watch the top stuff? Do you check out GT4 every now and then, Porsche Cup? What's the deal? How much do you care about the lower classes in sports car racing? Anyway, it is finally time to talk about some Formula driver news. Time for everyone's favorite segment, driver news. This week, mostly on the North American side of things, with a bunch of IndyNXT announcements, but of course with one major deal in there as well. First up, we had Bryce Aaron, Hailie Deegan and Nolan Elliott joining HMD / remaining at HMD in the IndyNXT program. Now, in the case of Aaron and Elliott, I don't have too much to say. Both are little whatever kind of moves. Let's see where this goes. For Hailie Deegan, I have to say, I don't know her personally. Well, I don't know her personally anyway. I've never seen her race either because I don't watch I've never seen her race either because I don't watch NASCAR. It's like the one motorsports thing I don't follow at all. But I have heard things that do lead me to believe she is going to be like Lindsey Brewer, which means I am not very excited. And I do always think, I feel like for every good woman coming along, there's one of them coming along too, and it does seem to set back this like the theme of we need more women in motor racing every time a subpar female driver comes along and buys their way into a series with like decent eyeballs on it. Of course, if you do it in like FRECA, it wouldn't really matter, but here IndyNXT is at least, I guess, seen and definitely followed by IndyCar fans, for example, so it does feel like a huge sort of setback for the female racing effort. But of course, this is just going off what I've read. Let's see how she actually drives once she steps in the car. Then we have James Schrey remaining at the Andretti IndyNXT squad. James Schrey is a rather curious character in my opinion, because he does look like a solid-ish racing driver. Like, you know, he's pretty quick in these IndyNXT cars, but the thing is, this will now be his 4th season, and he just lacks consistency to an extent where I'm not sure if doing another season will really do anything there. This is the kind of thing drivers tend to figure out usually in their 2nd year, sometimes in their 3rd, but if in your 3rd you're still massively struggling with consistency and stringing a season together, then I don't really see it going much better next season. But then again, if he's got the money to burn, fair enough. He is certainly, again, one of those like solid midfield benchmark drivers on the grid, and it can never hurt to have a couple more capable hands in these cars. The more exciting Andretti announcement, though, undeniably, is Dennis Hauger confirmed to make the almost like scandalous switch, in my opinion, from Formula 2 to IndyNXT, after it's been rumored that he might stick in F2 for a 4th year because of a really good deal. He has decided that it's not worth his time and money, and he wants to try his luck over in IndyCar. Now, why is it almost scandalous? Because honestly, going off the list of drivers recently going from F2 straight to IndyCar, one would have assumed he slots right in there. I don't think he is like considerably worse or something than, let's say, Callum Eilert. Sure, worse probably, maybe, but it's not, there aren't worlds in between. I would have assumed he would at least get like a test in IndyCar and like some interest from lower teams maybe, but apparently not. Apparently it is straight to IndyNXT. Then again, obviously with Andretti maybe opening doors in the future, so there is that side of it too. I am very interested in like the behind the scenes, what's the long-term plan here? Is it 1 year in IndyNXT and then the step up to presumably not Andretti itself, but you know what I mean, to IndyCar? I don't know, a very curious case. This has made the title battle a lot more interesting immediately, because before obviously I kept saying I see Kaya Colette more or less running away with this, but now I am not so sure. If Hauger can adapt to learning a couple new tracks very quickly, then I think he will be very much in contention as well. Sure, it remains to be seen how well he does in the ovals, but keep in mind, there aren't that many oval races in these series, so, you know, certainly one to watch out for next year. He could be running away with this thing. There's also been a lot of like post-season testing for the USF Juniors, USF 2000 and USF Pro 2000, but that is a little too much for this video, and I also haven't had time to really work my way through all of the entry lists and make sense of it, so this is something we'll save for a future episode. Instead, we do have a couple news concerning Europe, the most important of which is we have the confirmation now that Freddie Slater will indeed do the rumored FRECA program with Premos, so he will indeed not step up to F3 with Roden, thank God. Presumably now the second part of this rumor will also come true and he'll do a partial GB3 season. This is just speculation, but it sounds very likely at this point. Either way, one thing we can check, Slater doing a good program for next year is key. Then we have confirmation that Tim Tramnitz will indeed remain with MP Motorsports for another F3, I guess, title attempt. I am a little sad he is staying with MP, just in the sense it never really felt like last year they had the machinery to fight for a title, even if the drivers were better. And of course, Tramnitz is the sort of character who would, you know, expect to maybe fight for the title on this rookie heavy grid. So, I would have liked to step up, but I guess it is a good enough choice. And then, last but not least, we had the Ferrari Driver Academy Scouting Camp final with 4 finalists. One of them not super exciting, Costa Toparis winning the Asian/Oceania portion of that, and of course he is a little too old for a proper academy gig, but I suppose a decent benchmark driver, although they bring their own proper benchmark drivers. I believe it was Beganovic this time. So, you know, doesn't really matter. Topar is not particularly exciting, but the 3 Europeans they invited to that scouting final were rather exciting. It's Tibor Ramekers, Jacopo Martinezzi and Ethan Jeff Hall. You have heard me talk about probably all of them in some capacity. I am particularly excited about Ramekers. He is one of the stars in the OK Seniors this year, even though the titles he's won were a little underwhelming, or rather his championship results were a little underwhelming compared to how quick he's been. Definitely a guy to watch and super young. Then Martinezzi, I always feel like he overperforms a little, but this is of course just from the outside. I've got zero clue, I've got zero data. I don't know, it just always looks to me like he's not flashy or anything, but somehow consistently in like a top 5-ish something. So in some ways this is even more impressive given how stacked these European karting grids are. Certainly someone to keep an eye on, especially if Ferrari and likewise think his like proper peak potential is also there, then yeah, certainly an exciting driver. And then of course Ethan Jeff Hall, the world champion in the OK Seniors, British driver, also Ginetta Junior champion, so an exciting guy and certainly one we'll see in F4 machinery next year no matter what. If I had to bet, I would probably guess it's Ramekers taking this, at least in terms of performance. I rate him the highest. Let's see if Ferrari would like an Italian and just go with Martinezzi, or do it like last year and just don't go with anyone. All of these are viable options, but personally I would love Ramekers as a Ferrari junior member. Anyway, as always, it's been a lot. Now it's your time to drop all of your thoughts down in the comments. Let me know if you're happy that Slater is indeed not going to road in F3. And otherwise, I thank you all for watching and I hope to catch you in the next one.